Hello, everyone. I'm certified natural healthcare practitioner Erin Thole, and I'm super, super excited because I have with me today Paul Opheim, and we are going to be talking about some of the isopathic formulas that he has created. We're going to be talking about weight loss, leptin resistance, things of that nature. Leptin is a hormone that's made in the fat cells and talks directly to the brain to really just regulate pretty much everything in the body. But the main thing that we're talking about today is metabolism, energy levels, weight. If you do or don't lose weight, leptin really has a lot to do with that. So Paul's going to be filling us in on all the details surrounding that and filling us in on his different remedies and things like that he has that can be super, super helpful. And I've had a lot of great success with them in my practice. So thank you for being here today, Paul. How are you?
Good. Pleased to be here. Thanks for having me, Erin.
Good. I'm excited. I am going to read your bio real quick because I think it's pretty impressive. And I think that it helps to just kind of fill people in on who you are and really validates that, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. So Paul has worked in the field of cell signaling neuroendocrine research since 1995. He was a botany major and was pre-med student until drawn to graduate school in Taiwan, Japan, and China. In addition to acquiring fluency in Mandarin, Chinese, and Japanese, he became familiar with the traditional Chinese medicine, including qi energies, as applied to medicine and acupuncture and physical movement as used in various Asian martial arts. And after finishing his MA in Chinese literature with a minor in Japanese at the University of Minnesota, we're both Minnesotans, which is so awesome, and MIM at Thunderbird Graduate School of Global Management, he joined a Seattle-based biotech startup as an investor and researcher on the team, which developed the patented applications for homeopathic, isopathic hormones and growth factors, including HGH. He assisted with clinical studies and product development, including growth factor combinations for conserving lean mass, for persons with HIV, FGF2 for improving communications in autism, and HGH for anti-aging, as well as PTSD. Currently, as founder and research director of Leptica Research, LLC, Paul's research has led to the development of 50 plus isopathic formulas, including the leptin formula that we're talking about today, which circumvents leptin resistance and effectively addresses addictive eating and obesity. His major interests are creating formulas for PTSD and neurodegenerative diseases of aging, immune compromised health states such as sepsis, and chronic fatigue syndrome, TBI, CTE, and alcohol and opioid addictions. Paul is currently conducting an ongoing clinical study for PTSD, as well as proof of hypothesis case studies with doctors on 2 formulas he helped develop for type 1 diabetes and chronic kidney degeneration. Paul is a member of the Endocrine Society and Society of Neuroscience. That's all super, super great. And after I read your bio, I didn't know about this chronic kidney degeneration thing. I did know about the type 1 diabetes thing. We're going to have a separate conversation about the kidney thing because I do work with a lot of kidney patients as well. So that's a talk for another time, but welcome, welcome, welcome. So today we're going to talk about specifically leptin, the hormone leptin, and isopathics, and basically like what you do to help to facilitate like correction of that leptin resistance and things like that. So if you could kind of fill us in, first of all, on what is an isopathic. Because a lot of people are at least somewhat familiar with homeopathics, and it's similar, but I just kind of want to let you tell everybody about isopathics.
Okay, sounds good. Homeopathics are they use components that are part of the what's called the homeopathic pharmacopoeia, or a specific inventory of extracts and other things. And they are prepared in sequential, we could call it almost dilutions. Isopathics are made in the same fashion, but they are using recombinant DNA proteins, human proteins, such as growth hormone or estrogen, testosterone, the fibroblasts, growth factors, and that sort of a thing. And what you do is they're acquired from labs that are authorized to make them. So if you have bioidentical hormones, then those type of uh, components that are used for that all have to be recombinant DNA in terms of their derivation, because then they're pure, identical, and safe. And
Yes.
so I use those as the basis. So we're starting out with molecules, but then what we found, like with homeopathy, isopathy is where you have identical treats identical, is what it's called. And so then through specific sequential dilutions, then the the intensity of the frequency is altered. And even though we are unable to measure it based on the clinical studies that we've done over the years, we find that they are able to activate, at least we think that's what's happening, the cell receptor sites. So for example, with growth hormone, which we developed came out with it in 99, and then did a clinical study that was published, we found that the after a 3-week period of the placebo effect, we found that it very clearly produced the benefits that would be found if a person were getting growth hormone injections, for
Mhm.
example. And so what we think was happening is the cell receptor sites, which are found on the outside of cells, are activated, and then that causes the transmembrane um, cascade of events to take place into the cell and even to the cell nucleus, depending upon the type of cell signaling factor that's used. So when we talk about cell signaling factors, that includes things like hormones, growth factors, neurotrophic factors, cytokines, adipokines. There's different families. And for example, leptin is a hormone, but it's also an adipokine because, as you mentioned, it's derived from adipose cells primarily,
Yep.
the white adipose cells. So that's sort of the nature behind it. And one of the unique things about homeopathy and isopathy, which is what I exclusively do, is that we are able to combine the signaling of different cell signaling factors into one formula so that you're able to have a positive benefit for multiple pathways and mechanisms. So this way, it's not like a monotherapy,
Yep.
which really doesn't address the holistic needs that the body has to have, because it's a holistic entity after all.
Exactly. Exactly. So talk to me about the leptin remedy specifically and what one would use that remedy for, the different benefits that you have seen with it, um,
Okay.
all the good stuff around that.
I might add first that I originally was researching leptin for its neuroprotective effects for a Parkinson's formula.
Oh,
And then some doctors, because it has quite the neuroprotective benefits in that regard, and some doctors, that I, associate with, they said, but you're not doing anything for obesity and weight control. And I said, no. And they said, are you an idiot? And I said, I can be. And so I had to start looking into that. And so about 10 years ago, I came up with a formula for leptin alone. It's an isopathic formula, and I created what's called a homochord, which means it has several specific frequencies within the formula itself. And I did initially, what you do is some proof of hypothesis studies to determine, well, with FDA guidelines, is it safe and is it effective?
yeah.
And so it has been proven safe over the decades, even with injections that they tried to do with laboratory animals and that. So it's proven safe. And then is it effective? And it's it well, I guinea pigged myself first, and I found that I didn't have a weight problem, but I had a craving problem. And I remarkably, well, I was amazed that it cut back cravings for my big three sins, if you will, of potato chips, ice cream, and fried chicken.
So
You
many
know,
people
think of
sit,
your
I'm
childhood.
sure. Yeah.
Well, I was trying to figure out why do I have these? And you know, you can easily trace that back to childhood
Yeah.
and as rewards or as the pleasurable times that you have with people, that sort of a thing.
Mhm.
And so, uh, yeah, it was quite extraordinary because it just put the lid on it. And so that was there are two types of eating. One is for nutrition and one is for pleasure, or what they call hedonic eating in the research community. And so it was remarkable for me in how it addressed the pleasurable eating itself.
Mhm.
And so then what I did is proof of hypothesis, and then we're currently doing a research study using leptin along with several other cell signaling factors that are involved in in weight control, satiety, cravings that include GIP and GLP-1.
Okay.
And so that's pretty much what we found because the leptin itself is the master hormone for metabolism, the master hormone for craving, satiety. It interfaces with GLP-1, it interfaces with growth hormone, with IGF-1, it interfaces with a somatostatin, which is sort of the off switch off hormone for growth hormone,
Yeah.
and that relates to PTSD, which we'll discuss at another time, I hope.
Yeah,
And
sure.
so it became it was quite impressive. But then, as time went on, the leptin worked. It was proven to work, and the important issue is leptin resistance, which involves the blood-brain barrier. Should
Mhm.
I go into that a little bit now, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Like, I think the more information people have about like how their bodies work, the better. And like,
Okay, and
yeah.
I fully support that. Some people think that, oh, I should get my leptin levels measured. No. If you have excess fat, you have excess leptin,
Mhm.
period. Unless there are genetic variants, which are extremely rare, but that's not something that affects most people. And so, so let's say that you have excess fat, you will have excess leptin. And then there is the issue of it's called hyperleptinemia, in other words, excess. And then what happens, there are several things that happen, but the main issue is so think of it as torso leptin and head leptin, and in the middle you have what's called the blood brain barrier.
Yes.
I'm simplifying things, but it really boils down to this. Now, in order for leptin to signal in the brain, it has to go from your white fat cells across the blood-brain barrier to the different areas of the brain. And since we're talking about cravings and satiety and appetite, primarily to the hypothalamus, but also the hippocampus, which deals with rewards and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Now, what they have found though is leptin doesn't cross by itself. It needs sort of a transporter mechanism to help it cross. And when you have excess leptin, think of it as bottlenecking, where you have a bunch of it, like say at a stadium where a few people try and go through the exit, they manage. But if everybody tries to go through, nobody goes through, or
Yep.
very few people do. And this is almost the same type of a thing that happens. And when a person has high triglycerides, you know, in
Mhm.
their system, it makes the problem even worse in terms of getting the leptin to cross the blood brain barrier and go to the areas of the brain where it's supposed to be of benefit. And so, if you are at normal weight, you have more effective leptin signaling in the brain than you would have if you're overweight. So, unfortunate, it provides this okay, I've got all this leptin, and instead of doing all of this benefit for me, in fact, I'm having less benefit because I've got too much of it.
Yep.
And this, it's simplistically stated, but this is what underlies pretty much the concept of leptin resistance.
Mhm. Exactly. That's a great description. So, how would this formula work, like comparison wise, to some of these um newly popular weight loss drugs, injections, things like that we're starting to see on the market, which I have like extreme concerns over. Um, how is this different, swappable, you know, all of that stuff?
Good question. There are several major differences. One, as I mentioned earlier, is that we're dealing with the energetic signaling.
Mhm.
Um, think of it this way. You're walking down the sidewalk, say you're in a new city, you're walking down the sidewalk, and then you get a whiff of something and you instantly get this recall from, say, a picnic when you were a child or a favorite experience that you had. The molecule, say it's an aromatic molecule, entered your nose, got the olfactory lobe,
Mhm.
but that molecule never got to wherever your memories are stored. Instead, it was the energy of the molecule that was transmitted, and somehow, and nobody really knows how exactly, it awakened that memory which is there.
Mhm.
And so that sort of underlies how we believe this is happening with ours, because we found that, I mean, in terms of it being able to affect a positive response or not, that ship has sailed. Since 1995, with our first clinical study, we have seen again and again and again whether it's a mute autistic child becoming vocal because of FGF2 or other things, or the results from our recent PTSD study, or our proof of hypothesis ongoing study now with CKD, we know that it works. And so what we're dealing with is the energy of the molecule. We are not dealing with injections,
Mhm.
so you don't have needles. In our entire history, we're unaware of any adverse side effects.
Which
And
is
that
huge.
also,
Yeah.
well, I think it is because I don't really want to be taking something for weight loss or appetite control and find out I get nauseous or start vomiting over it, or even have the danger of where peristaltic contractions, the gut motility is compromised,
Exactly.
as that's too scary. Um, but I won't go into the that side of things because my research is focused on the isopathic side of it.
Yes.
So what we have is a formula that does not have adverse side effects. At least none have ever been reported in any of the 50 plus formulas. And we also don't have where you have to do injections and that sort of a thing because it's prepared in a liquid. And so the spray and signaling, and again, it can't be proven, but we think what's happening is there is signaling that takes place through the neuroenergetic system,
Okay.
however you want to define that, and that activates the cellular response.
Mhm. Awesome. Awesome. I love the fact that there's no side effects. Like you're not going to, like you said, be nauseous or have some of these really like I have massive amounts of concerns about some of these drugs and like the side effects of them and like what that's going to spiral into, you know? And so, but I understand that a lot of people are just kind of like desperate and looking for some
There,
kind of, hope and help and things like that. But we kind of
there's one thing, but pardon me, there's one
oh,
thing I'd like to add though, and that I've found over the years that more and more people are developing environmental sensitivities or medication sensitivities. People who are considered empaths tend to be particularly susceptible to this. People that have chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, that, and also COVID-19 is able to induce a hyper response to other things in certain people. An example would be as if you have issues walking down the detergent aisle at the grocery store. then you and it makes you nauseous, then you know there's probably something there that you're hypersensitive to, if you will. If so, some people we found it's in homeopathy, it's called approving. In
Mhm.
an isopathy, I use the same word. And what this would be is say that you're an ultra sensitive person. For example, it could be a child or elderly people in particular, because they're the amount of something that they can take has to be, you have to be careful with it. And so if you take the leptin formula, what it should do is promote satiety, lessen the desire to have certain things, the hedonic, the pleasures. But if you find that you are hungrier, then you know the formula can work for you, but you're having an overstimulation of it. So uh, perversely, it has the opposite effect, which is, I think, very interesting.
Yes.
But that's a good thing, because instead of 3 sprays 3 times a day, say, for example, with an average adult for the leptin formula, maybe once a day or twice a day, 1 spray is sufficient, because you've got sufficient stimulus to achieve the benefits that you want.
And then you get more bang for your buck because you don't have to take it as often.
Ab- Absolutely, you do. Absolutely, you do.
Yeah, that's awesome. So why, this is a question that, a lot of people kind of ask, and we get this about multiple, different types of situations and stuff like that in our line of work. Why
Uh-huh.
don't people know about this? Like, why isn't this in the media? Why isn't this, obviously
It, well,
on.
okay. Leptin, the hormone, was discovered in 1994.
Mhm.
And then if you go back and look at journal articles and newspaper articles, 95, 96, 97, 98, it was considered, oh, we've got the miracle cure for being overweight or obesity.
Mhm.
But what they are unable to do is create what's called an analog. In other words, an altered molecule of leptin
Yep.
that they could patent.
Yep.
The problem is, like what you find with certain antibiotics or even some of the weight management drugs, is that they're taken off the market because of the adverse side effects.
Yep.
Because when you look at leptin, we call it pleiotropic, which means it has so many diverse applications and that affects so many different mechanisms and pathways, that if you're going to alter leptin, the chances of it not having adverse side effects, well, they haven't been able to do it. And so we're in 2023 now at the end of that, and they've been trying to do something since the late 90s. And so the chances of being able to do a molecule that you can get a patent on and then give to people, it can't be done, really. Um, and
Yeah.
you're not going to get your injection in the brain. And again, where the injections of these things often happen is, remember, in the torso side, not on the head side. So we really can't inject your head. That
No,
hurt, I
that
think.
would probably cause a multitude of issues. I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Um, it's, yeah. So basically, and this is something that I talk about when I teach people about leptin in seminars and things like that, or just one-on-one clients, is there isn't a drug that they can give you to correct leptin and address the leptin issue. So instead, we're going to work off of, all these other drugs and things like that I can prescribe, in an effort to kind of like band-aid the issue, so it's
Mm.
really about the cash. So a lot of times, like, I'm always impressed. I think I've had 2 clients in my 17-year career talk to me about how their doctor talked to them about leptin resistance. And I
Oh,
was like, who's your doctor? Because that person is fantastic to like actually be talking to their patients about that, because usually it's like, well, there's nothing I can give you or prescribe for this.
mhm.
So, you know, so
Yeah.
yeah, it really just kind of boils down to the cash.
Well, and it's important to remember that as the weight decreases, the excess weight decreases to normal, then your leptin resistance goes away.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
because you have normal leptin levels. So
Mhm.
that ultimately is the goal that
Yes.
you would want to have.
So then
Um,
people are or are not taking the remedy forever. Like how do, or is it kind of like on a person by person, or kind of, you know, like you take it, you don't take it, you take it, you don't, like as needed? Like how do you usually recommend people go with that?
Initially, to start, it's important for the body, I believe, to get a sense for what you're doing, to get the weight down, the excess fat weight down.
Yep.
I want to be careful to distinguish between fat weight and lean mass weight, because
Yes.
really what we're talking about is unwanted visceral fat.
Yes.
And so when you get the visceral fat down, you will have improved leptin signaling. So you will have improved control over your eating desires and the need for nutrition and that sort of a thing. But there's one thing I think that's really important to remember. And if we go back to where I, would pig out on ice cream and potato chips and fried chicken, the it's important to remember that cells have memory for everything
Yeah.
throughout your life. And I mean, it's so crucial because even that affects the immune system,
Mhm.
which, as we know, is ultra important, even more so having had all of the COVID experiences and news about that.
Yeah.
So, like, I know a doctor who it was, she could almost gain weight by looking at food. At least that's how she described it.
Yeah.
And it had been a lifelong problem. And so I've known her for decades. And so it's something that I'm aware of, even though when I was younger, if I didn't have 4,000 calories a day, I'd lose weight. It was just one of those, it's so unfair type of things.
Everybody's
And so
different. Yeah.
exactly they are. And so she went from about 160 down to 135 over a July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February, over an 8-month period, which was pretty good, not too much, because you could probably address more about why you don't want to lose weight quickly and the
Exactly.
dangers of
Yeah.
that. And so I reminded the doctor that, okay, you're at where you want to be, but you've got to remember your cells have memory. So when you go to that church potluck, when you go to the buffet at a friend's house, when you have that picnic in the summer and the picnic tables filled with potato salad and everything else, your cell memory will remind you of the pleasures of grazing, if we could use that word, just chatting and eating and chatting and eating. And you can't deny that it's a wonderful time. And so I told her to keep the lid on it, take your leptin before you go. So that
The
you won't pull
situational.
your exactly. And
Okay.
that's a good way to put it. So identify the situations where you're prone to overeat.
Okay.
And then you will probably have to take that. Now, it's sort of it's not the same, but it's sort of like smoking, because people that quit smoking, the longer they've quit, the easier it is to ignore that cell memory for
Mm.
wanting to have a puff.
Yeah.
And so think of it somewhat like this too. And it's not a bad thing. It's just something we have to recognize about the way the body responds to external stimuli. So I I still use it myself, because I thought, well, have I gotten past this? After all these years, have I gotten past this pigging out on my three pleasures? And I find that to some degree I have, but not completely. And I
Yeah.
don't expect that I ever will.
Yeah.
And I
And
don't need to.
yeah, and I think that food is I talk about this a lot with people, that food is an emotional thing, you know? So like you're
Uh-huh.
never going to be void of the emotional attachments that come with certain foods. You just learn how to deal with it better. And so this is something that can make it really easy to deal with it. And to get
Uh-huh.
the results that
The-
you want. So it's working on the physiological, but it's also helping with that mental and like emotional component of it as well, like the emotional
yeah.
craving. You know, a lot of times I think that that's people's issue more than it is like I have to have chocolate or I'm going to die. Like there's like an emotional almost need for the chocolate. And so the leptin signaling remedy really helps with that.
It does. I think there's an important thing that you're you're bringing up, and that is pleasurable eating. And I think it's necessary to define pleasurable eating from nutrient eating
Yes.
because and and for a number of years it's always bothered me that they call junk food still a type of food, which to me sort of validates that okay, it's still good to eat then. But I coined a term that if it's called doof, and if you take food and you spell it backwards, you really have what I consider to be well, let me just define it first. Doof are items eaten or drunk that are highly processed, of low nutrition, with added sugars, added salts, or added fats. They're designed to be tasty and they're often high caloric, in other words, energy dense.
Yes.
Now, we you know exactly what I'm talking about. Hello, pop potato chips.
Yeah.
um, guilty.
Yeah.
And we all have ours, and we have habits that develop around this pleasurable eating or doof eating. Uh, hedonic sounds a little too. We won't use that term because it sounds a little too out of place for eating, but reward eating, that affects the dopaminergic system. That is not the same as the systems you biologically have to get nutrients to sustain your health. And so I think it's, I've come to realize it, and I think you probably tell your clients that time and time again, you've got this and you've got that, and this does this and that does that. Well, I like to use the term food. I like to use the term doof because it helps to clearly illustrate that, yeah, doof is there for a purpose. It's to reward yourself, but it's not for everyday consumption.
Exactly. You
And
treat
the
days.
food
Yeah.
is, yes,
Hmm.
food is for everyday consumption because you need it to sustain your health and life.
Hmm.
Doof is not necessary, but rewarding ourselves for things is important,
Yeah.
just not 24/7 like they would like us to do.
Exactly.
Does that
Exactly.
make sense?
Yeah, I love that explanation, and I love the doof term. I use the term food like substances. And so, talking about, and I've been teaching my son about that because he's been introduced to the idea of McDonald's. He's never had McDonald's and he never will, as far as, if I have anything to say with it. But he somebody at school, apparently is like really into McDonald's. And so he calls it Old McDonald's Farm. And he knows what like the logo looks like. And so when we're driving home from school,
Uh-huh.
we go past this and he's like, what did he say yesterday? He said, why do some people eat things that aren't food at Old McDonald's Farm? And I had to he's almost 5. So he's very smart. So he's just trying to like figure this out because he knows like he doesn't eat gluten, he doesn't eat dairy, he eats
Uh-huh.
very, very clean. And but he does have like treat days, like sprinkled in there and stuff like that, because that's important. And I don't want him to have like a food complex. So I'm trying to like explain to him, like if we bought something from McDonald's and
Mhm.
we didn't eat it and we just let it like sit out on the counter, maybe I should do this to actually like show him. Now I'm thinking, if we let it sit out on the counter for, let's say, a month, 3 months, a year, it's going to be the exact same thing. It's not going to go bad at all. That's not normal. Food, if you don't eat it, like it goes bad. And he knows this, because if I open up, like a cut up pineapple and I'm like, ooh, that's gone bad, or, whatever. Like he understands the concept of like food goes bad. So I'm trying to explain to him, like, this doesn't go bad. So if you put that into your body. Like it's, and he knows what toxic means. He knows what, like chemicals, are and stuff
Uh-huh.
like that. So I'm talking to him about, something that doesn't break down, it doesn't go bad, and you put that inside your body and expect your body to like digest that and break that down, like that's going to be really toxic to your body, and it's not going to make you feel good. And I started to dive a little bit into like addictiveness and things like that, which might be a little over his head, but he's he's asking these questions about it and things like that, which I think are important for little people to understand. And just really kind of ties back into the do for the food like substances and things like that. Like I think that the more people understand about their guilty pleasures and their comfort foods and stuff like that,
Mhm.
the less they'll want them, maybe not want less, they'll crave them, but the time between indulging should become further and further between the more people are educated, I feel like.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's another important thing I think you mentioned, and that was toxicity.
Mhm.
EDCs are that's a short for endocrine disrupting chemicals.
Yes.
And there every year there's an increasing amount of research out there that is showing how endocrine disrupting chemicals are influencing the pathways and mechanisms of signaling throughout the body.
Mm-hmm.
And one that's important to remember too is that benzene derivatives, where you have that carbon circle. I'm not a chemist, so I won't go into it, but things that are petroleum extract derivatives, those are not normal to the body and they're toxic.
Yep.
More now, granted, mercury is several thousand times more toxic than lead.
Mhm.
Um, but you have these EDCs which are capable of, if they are of the right molecular configuration, they can either substitute for the signaling factors that you want, or they can alter the pathway.
Mhm.
So it's important to remember too, I think, that we've been talking about mechanisms and pathways, and you have you have items which start a pathway, you have cell signaling factors that are influenced by a pathway, and then you have the cell signaling factors that are resultative. So you have causative in the middle, and then you have resultative. And it's really quite extraordinary how the body has so many mechanisms and signaling pathways, and the way there is what we call crosstalk, where they can influence each other. How you have the ghrelin, and then you have growth hormone, and they interact with each other, but then growth hormone and leptin interact with each other. And so if you're going to introduce something that's alien, something that's foreign, it's almost invariable that it's not going to have a beneficial effect on the normal biologically developed cell signaling pathway. There's something that's, if you don't mind, I'd like to illustrate this with a profound example. Um, Smoking has nicotine. Nicotine is a wannabe hormone, if you will. It acts like a hormone.
Interesting.
What it does is it suppresses an appetite stimulating hormone called NPY, neuropeptide Y. So think of it, nicotine suppresses NPY, which is appetite stimulating. And you may have heard people say, well, I can't quit smoking because then I'll start eating or
Yeah,
I'll gain weight.
that's a
That
serious concern for a lot of people. Yeah.
And that is what underlies it. Nicotine suppresses NPY, and if you take the nicotine away, then what will happen with NPY? It will overexpress
Mhm.
because you've created an imbalance. Think of it as a seesaw or a teeter-totter. And so you will have, and you may not be aware of it, but you will have an appetite stimulating sense that nicotine had held in bay.
Mhm.
Now, what's really interesting, and one of the things that I think is so cool about leptin is leptin directly suppresses NPY.
Hmm.
So you realize the implications
Yeah.
is, and there's two of them actually. Leptin can, I don't want to use the word substitute, but it can normalize the expression of NPY so you don't have this overeating effect, which will take
Yeah.
place. The other thing that's important is that leptin also affects the dopaminergic system, the reward system, and puts the lid on that. So it's very rare, and I don't believe it's sufficient of itself. But as you know, addictions cover an entire spectrum from minimally addictive to hyper addictive.
Yeah.
And I've actually heard people say that, well, yeah, I found that wasn't smoking as much. And I'm thinking, what? Just on leptin? They must be the ones that are not highly addicted to smoking,
Yeah.
to the nicotine. But if you're wondering, is leptin signaling in my nicotine addiction formula? Yes, it is, because it does serve that purpose. So for people that are wanting to quit smoking, but say, oh, I can't because I'll gain weight, think of leptin because if taken, it should help you avoid that problem
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah.
I can't guarantee it because
Exciting.
I can't guarantee you'll take it, and everybody's different. But it has been amazing over the last decade to hear people say that it's helped me quit.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's huge. Um, yeah, I think that this is just a wealth of information. Um, I think one last question, and then we'll, kind of have to do like a part two at a later
Okay.
date. So when people are doing the leptin signaling spray, how quickly
Mhm.
do they usually start to see weight drop off?
That depends because this gets to an interesting point, and I'll make it short because this can be for another discussion. Leptin is also involved in bone formation. It's bone morphogenic, as we call it. So I personally do not like it when a person just measures their overall weight because you are composed of lean mass and fat mass. Fat mass is voluminous for per pound,
Mhm.
whereas lean mass is dense per pound. And when you're dealing with things like growth hormone or promoting lean mass or leptin, time and time again, I hear people say, well, my clothes, I've brought in, cinched my belt so much more, but I'm not losing as much weight as I want to. And I think it's really, really important for people to understand that total weight is not at all a good indicator of your overall lean fat mass ratio and health. And so
It's changing the body
BMI,
composition.
pardon me?
It's changing the body composition.
Exactly. In fact, it's
It's a
proving it.
tool. Yeah.
It's improving it. And so what I recommend that people do is have a favorite piece of clothing that you used to fit into that you can't fit into anymore.
Mhm.
Or like if you're a guy and you used to have a 32-inch waist and now you're a 36-inch waist. Well, a healthier goal regarding visceral fat is 4 inches,
Mhm.
not
Yeah.
24 pounds and not 30 pounds. Your goal is 4 inches.
Yep.
And I realize that with age, it's not the same for me at this age as it was half as young again, but because gravity seems to have a hormonal effect in and of itself. Um, but but it's important to remember that what your target is visceral fat, and so use parameters or things that allow you to measure your visceral fat reduction. And that is a decrease in aches and pains. It's a decrease in your waist circumference. Use a string or a soft tape and measure it over the navel and record that. And to get back to your answer about how long would it take to notice it, um, there are multiple pathways and mechanisms involved. So the weight will be gradual, but you may notice something within the first week or two.
Mhm.
It's not going to be like what marketers, if we're going to be honest, it's not going to be like what marketers tell you can do.
Yeah.
Because if you lose weight too quickly, and this will bring up in another topic, but if you lose weight too quickly, you may be releasing toxins that the fat cells store, and that taxes your kidneys and your livers.
Yep.
That's one reason not to. Your body also doesn't know if you're on a diet or if you're starving.
Yep.
And so it will produce additional, and remember this, it will produce additional small fat cells
Mhm.
waiting to be filled up with good stuff for the next time you encounter something where you're going to be starving. So these are two primary reasons why you don't want to lose weight too quickly.
Yep.
And also, it really does involve a lifestyle change,
Yes.
whether it's just foods or exercise, as you know, and you've told your clients. And so you're not going to have a lifestyle change immediately. I mean, when I try to get myself to go to the gym, it's not within a day or two that I can convince myself to do it. It takes a while, and then I get into the routine. And so if you can get into a routine overnight, fantastic. Most people, myself included, cannot.
Yep.
And so, but there is one of the ladies that's in the study, research study that we're doing. And let's see if I could say what she said here, if I can find that. I don't have it written down, but just to paraphrase it, she probably wants to lose about 40 pounds. She's in her 30s, to give you a little bit of background. And what she said is, I just don't have the desire for snacking in the evening,
That's
which
awesome.
was my big no-no. And her partner said she doesn't seem to have the facial puffiness
Hmm.
that she had. And I hadn't heard this one before, but in a way it makes sense because you have excess fat that can accumulate all over.
Yeah.
And besides her, as weight goes down, when you're overweight, you have low systemic inflammation.
Hmm.
And this is a whole different talk we'll get into for chronic afflictions. But when you are overweight, you have low-grade systemic inflammation, and that can easily contribute to the aches and pains because you have an excess of inflammatory proteins
Yep.
produced. They're
Hmm.
necessary, but not when in excess. And so those are things that are usually clearly noticed within the first, second, and third weeks.
Awesome.
But but again, it's a lifestyle change. You didn't gain weight overnight. You don't want to lose it overnight because that
Exactly.
is not
Yeah.
healthy.
Not healthy at all. And yeah, I mean, we live in a culture where everyone wants like, now, I want the quick fix, but we want
Won't
to
work.
do this the right way for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yay, I think that this is going to be exciting for a lot of people to listen to this video. If they want to order the leptin, cell signaling spray, they can contact me, and I can, get an order ready for them. It's a
It
$50
is
spray, right?
right. And then the priority mail is I believe it's 9.45,
Yeah.
regardless of the amount.
Mhm.
There was one thing I was going to mention, but I forgot. Oh, if they have additional questions, I mean, I always welcome questions. When I taught
Yes.
at the university, the only dumb question was the one not asked.
Thank
So
you.
if they have questions, maybe they could contact you, and then we could put together the answers to their questions, and then as a PDF, so people would be able to read through that,
Yep.
because
Like the
it's a lot to, yeah, it's a lot to digest, pun intended. Um, and so we do want to make the answers available to the questions that people have.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll put all my info as usual down below, and you can contact me to order, or if you have any questions, and I can always get in touch with Paul to, answer those questions if I don't have the answer. And he's going to be providing us with some literature as well, so that I think, attach to this video. So that will be really helpful as well. But thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Paul, very, very much for talking about this. I think this is the perfect time, going into the holidays and the new year and all of that good stuff. Just help people feel their best and start off the new year on a healthy foot. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. It was my pleasure.